a lot of us, sometimes in churches when we talk about Scottish independence, you come up against a kind of reticence. I think the same thing we need to do for this, more to actually make people more aware of the truth of the situation rather than what they hear and what some media outlet decides the editorial policy is. So I'll say no more than that.
Well, sorry, even with that, yes, you may get a fairly sanitised version through mainstream newsprint or broadcast media, and to some extent that's understandable because the pictures from Gaza are horrific. You notice I don't share any of those. But on your phone, if you are following international news outlets, if you are simply following people in Gaza, if you are following the journalists in Gaza, over 100 of whom have been killed, who are trying to get that message out because international journalists are not being allowed in, you'll see the reality. Anyone who wants to see the reality of Gaza can see the reality of Gaza.
Thank you very much. Very moving. I've got a dilemma in that where I live in Fife, the imposed candidate by the Labour machine is the head of MAP. And I've supported MAP when I cycled the West Bank years ago to raise money for MAP. And I'm really in a dilemma. A friend of mine who was a Labour MP resigned from the party this week after 40 years because he can't identify with the serial liar he calls Keir Starmer. And I know you have to join things to change things, but I have very many doubts that somebody representing a constituency where I now live is going to have any effect on the impact of the Israeli lobby and its various networks of support upon Keir Starmer or his party. And for me, that's a real dilemma.
Well, I do understand, and I know that a number of MAP supporters and also indeed quite a number of doctors involved in our project have written to MAP with their disquiet. I didn't sign that letter because I would not want it to be party political. Obviously there is some disquiet at having the chief executive standing as a candidate, and indeed she stood for selection in London last year to be a Labour candidate. I don't really want to go into that specifically, except I would say that MAP, the organisation, which works on the ground, is fantastic. And you know, she has been given leave to campaign and to stand. Obviously, you can only think, will someone in being elected, will she have influence? Will she be able to get Labour to change their position? I don't know, and I'm not going to try and guess. But there is an interim chief executive, and the organisation, all the people who actually do the grunt work, the frontline work, and particularly one of the strengths of MAP is their Gaza team is a team of Gazans who've been working for MAP in Gaza for years and years, who I know very well. And therefore I wouldn't want the fact we have an election, the party political side of that, to take away from the absolutely incredible work that MAP does. I would assume that if she is elected, she will stand down. Obviously there was disquiet about her position. Is that what stopped the criticism of Labour's lack of action in pushing for an immediate ceasefire, not voting for an immediate ceasefire? But it may be possible that if she is elected, she will have influence. I think that's what anybody can hope, as I say, in defence of her. But I came out of the NHS to campaign to become an MP, and there were people who said I should be struck off as a doctor, and who wrote to my hospital saying I should be sacked, etc. So I don't particularly want to give in to that. But yes, I recognise the disquiet, but that doesn't change MAP's values, its priorities, the work that it does in London, the work it does to fundraise, the team that it has set up in Egypt to drive supplies in, and the distribution work that's being done by an incredible team who have suffered themselves, suffered displacement, bereavement. Mahmoud Shalobi, who is stayed in the north with his elderly parents, is still there. You'll see if you follow them on social media, you will see little video pieces from him. And Mahmoud, just not to be cheeky like myself, was a fairly well upholstered chap, and you can see how much weight he's lost because of the famine in the north. So I wouldn't want that issue regarding their former chief executive to detract from people supporting MAP and the incredible work that they do.
Yeah, I think this gentleman here is just basically, got the same thoughts as I have on Melanie Ward. But my wife and I have supported MAP for years, long before this crisis there. Probably during another crisis at some stage. I can't remember how many years it was. And really I've now both got, doubts about an organisation about Melanie Ward as the chief executive of it, in view of what MAP does and the good work that MAP does. And we've got a leader of the party that she represents who advocates withholding basic aid from the Gaza people and the people in the West Bank. And I think it's Melanie Ward that should be doing a bit of self-reflection in this, for her to answer that question. Not maybe sometime in the future she might be able to influence Labour or Keir Starmer. He's not going to be influenced by anybody, and if anybody tries to influence him, he just simply gets rid of them. But I think that's, and I hope the good people, it's not like office, it's what's it, County Beef, will hold her to account and get her to answer that question, how she can reconcile the views of Labour and Starmer. And let's face it is the views of the whole Labour Party. I'm a member of the SNP and I can't pick and choose what I like about the SNP. You sign up to it and that's it. And if you don't like what Keir Starmer says, you get out of it. But I don't think she should be standing there with a clear conscience.
I think that is, as you said, for the people of her possible constituency. And I think that's a question for people to attend any hustings or to write to her. She will have an online email and ask. All I'm saying is I think I would ask people to disconnect that. Obviously what happens afterwards, whether she's elected or not elected, what happens to her position in MAP will be up for MAP to decide, and people can reserve judgment until we see what happens. But it is absolutely for people who could be future constituents to attend hustings, to write to her and actually put those questions. I would just ask people to separate that from the utterly vital work that MAP has done, not just in Gaza, but the West Bank, in Lebanon and Jordan, but particularly in Gaza at the moment. They are one of the most effective NGOs, non-governmental organisations on the ground at the moment. And I wouldn't want people in protest at her candidacy to then withhold donations or support from MAP, because that's not the time for us to do that. But if you're in that constituency, even if you're not, you can write to her and ask how she reconciles those views. That's her views and up to her to defend.
Yeah, what I would like to ask is how we can see an end to this. Because, I think obviously mistakes were made when the State of Israel was set up. The State of Palestine should have been set up at the same time with proper sort of measures to make sure this kind of thing didn't happen. But we are where we are. And the only way it's going to end is by Israel stopping doing what it's doing. And the only way that's going to happen is, first of all, pressure from within Israel, which there is some. There are Israelis who are very much against what their present government is doing, but also international pressure. And many countries, South Africa and Ireland and so on, have recognised Palestine and are trying to take Israel to the International Court of Justice and Netanyahu to the International Criminal Court and so on. And here in Scotland, well, that's not Scotland, but in the UK, there's such a disconnect between public opinion, all these thousands of people turning out to demonstrations, and the government is still sending arms to Israel, and the same is happening in America. Now, Israel is just one country. We're not economically dependent on it. If enough countries were to stop sending arms and absolutely boycott Israel, make it clear what you were doing is unacceptable, you've got to stop. I'm sure it would happen. So what is the hold that Israel has on Britain and America?
Well, obviously, Britain often tries to sidestep its responsibility in this. They completely forget Arthur Balfour and the Balfour Declaration, which is what laid the foundation by promising Palestine as if it was empty land. I mean, that was the first mistake. But also the British Mandate from 1917 up to 1948. And when things got really difficult, the British Army just gave up and withdrew, and that left a complete free-for-all, leading then in 1948 to the establishment of Israel. And as you say, the time to have come up with a negotiated solution was then. Obviously, there was a proposal put forward from the UN, which I showed in those maps of disappearing land. But naturally enough, for the Palestinians at the time, it didn't look terribly generous going, we're going to take a big chunk of your land, but you'll still have a fair amount of it. They were going, wait a minute, this is our country. And that was never recognised or followed through. Part of the issue is, of course, the Israel lobby in America is incredibly strong. And so presidents of America tend to be in a position where they are committed to supporting Israel because of domestic pressure, not just because of any relationship with Israel. America is a major bankroller of the country of Israel, not just for arms, but for everything. And obviously the UK has a tendency now to just follow along in the US's shadowing. We see in Germany, the German government has also painted themselves into very difficult corners trying to defend the indefensible. Now, we all understand the sense of guilt that Germany has because of the Holocaust, but to my mind that should make Germany anti-genocide, not just, a Jewish state can do what it likes. They get a free pass to do anything. Never again should be never again for anybody. And that's an absolute failure within German politics. And it radiates out from that into European politics. But I think a lot of it, we saw after 2014. 2014 was horrific. But as soon as things calm down, the international attention moves away. And there's that sense of Israel has it contained. People are contained within Gaza or the West Bank. And I think what this shows is that it's not. It's like if you put something in a pressure cooker, it will eventually blow up in your face. And as I say, I do hope that international leaders recognise the status quo ante before the 7th of October is not a solution. If we just got back to the 6th of October. Social media is full of that. We had a ceasefire on the 6th of October. Not if you were in Gaza, you didn't. Not if you were looking at conditions in Gaza. So I think as well as fundraising and protesting for a ceasefire and things at the moment, we need to keep this up. We need to make sure that our governments, the next government, can't just go back to ignoring it. And obviously in America, God help us, literally where America is going after this also. But it is vital that the people in any country stand up for human rights and justice. And we know that in polls, the vast majority of people in the UK want a ceasefire, want the release of hostages, want humanitarian aid, and want a future for Gaza. What this current ultra-right-wing Israeli government want is something quite different. And they've been talking about ethnically cleansing Gaza since 2013. And so the problem for groups like ours of thinking, how do we rebuild, how do we help healthcare recovery? We have no idea what Gaza is going to look like at the end of this. Because at the moment, there's no sign of it stopping. Israel can't even describe what does the day after look like. What is their aspiration? What is their aim? Other than total elimination, including killing and also driving people out of Gaza. So at the moment, it's a very, very dark place. And it's very hard for groups like ours, partnership, to prepare for the day after the war, because we have no idea what it's going to be like. And I think that it can be tiring, writing letters, protesting, going to the vigils, but all of us need to realise that in comparison to what for you are people in Gaza you don't know, for me, their friends and colleagues, we can never let up. And so for me, simply being able to talk to you about the reality of Gaza is something that I can try to do to raise awareness and keep this in people's minds.
I'm kind of correct in the assessment that successive UK governments, and I appreciate that UK governments often have a overinflated sense of importance on the world stage, seem to me to have done absolutely nothing to try to create that just solution for Palestine and Israel. Has there been anything going on behind the scenes? And also, I kind of guess connected with that, that increased conflation between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which you've seen particularly in the Labour Party, where you cannot seem to criticise the state of Israel without suddenly being anti-Semitic.
It's very clear in the definitions of anti-Semitism that criticising the Israeli government is not anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, what you will find is people on social media or anywhere else that will try to conflate the two. But under the definitions, the accepted definitions of anti-Semitism, it isn't. We criticise our own governments, we criticise America, we criticise other governments. We have exactly the same right to criticise the Israeli government. It's always important when doing that we are careful not to stray into tropes or lazy phrases that are anti-Semitic, because actually if someone manages to put you in that ducat, they shut you up. And so it is always important to look at your language and keep what your criticism is, focus on who's making the decisions, who's bankrolling it, and what is it that they're doing. As you say, successive UK governments have not done anything other than warm words. I visited there, we talked about the two-state solution. What nonsense is the two-state solution? We kept hearing the Israeli government talking about facts on the ground, which is exactly what I called conquest by concrete. Oh look, we've built all this. This is now the facts on the ground, you just have to accept it. And it's been going at an accelerated rate, including in the last 8 months, because they know the international focus is on Gaza. And therefore, the extremist settlers who've been driving people off their farms and villages, often backed up by the IDF. That's part of why there were so little IDF soldiers around Gaza on the 7th of October, because a lot of them were in the West Bank, taking part in that. And the whole issue of both the Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate, it's as if there's no institutional memory of that within any UK government to take responsibility. We were part of drawing lines on a map that have led to a number of conflicts in the Middle East and Near East. We were particularly involved in the creation of Israel, in the British Mandate, and then later in the abandonment of that mandate. And particularly the Labour Party, obviously you mentioned the position they're in. There are a number of MPs within the Labour Party who do speak up and stand up for Palestinian rights. And I've worked on the cross-party group. I am a patron of the Balfour Project. I'm also a member of what we used to call the Palestinian Breakfast Club, because we met at 8:30 in the morning and continued until the election was called through our Zoom meetings. And that contains Labour MPs who are active on this. What I would say is the chilling effect of the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn as being anti-Semitic and the Labour Party as being anti-Semitic. And I do have to say, in a debate on anti-Semitism, there were Jewish Labour MPs describing some of what was in their mailbag. And believe me, it absolutely was anti-Semitic, and it was horrific. And I wouldn't like to get either social media or emails like that. But it has created such a chilling effect that other than people like myself, my colleague Tony Shepherd, certain Labour and even a couple of Conservative MPs who had joined our group recently, who were committed to speaking out. MPs where this is not a burning issue for them for personal or historical reasons, they just keep quiet. It has simply been made into a poison chalice. Don't touch it, keep away from it. And therefore that has exactly the chilling and silencing effect that it's meant to have. And all of us need to be very clear about what the definitions of anti-Semitism are and what they aren't. And we should speak out against anti-Semitism, and particularly if we see the Jewish community here in Scotland being blamed for decisions of the Israeli government, or the Muslim population here being described as Hamas, being harassed or attacked. We can't have that fellow Scots here are put into, cubby holes and labelled and attacked and undermined in their position here. And what we've seen across the UK, the less extreme north of the border, but also happening, is this rise in both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and we mustn't allow that to take root here, because that then weakens your ability to be part of the solution. So all of us need to be conscious of how we speak, what we say, how we treat others. But our right to criticise the policies of any Israeli government is our right, and particularly this Israeli government, which are utterly appalling. And I think, as I said, we were there at the start of the Madrid Peace Conference, and there were multiple countries that were involved in supporting that. And it gave me one of the most abiding memories I have of Gaza. Hans and I had about 7 chest injuries in by about 7:30 in the morning. And because we lived in the hospital, we were the only doctors who'd made it to the hospital, because Hamas were against the peace process. Now, when we lived there, Hamas were tiny. They were troublemakers. They would, attack our cars or whatever, but they were tiny. But that was because they weren't supporting the peace process and they were attacking other Gazans. By about 4:30 in the afternoon, things had calmed down. We had our patients sorted and into intensive care. And the intensive care in Al-Akhli overlooked Palestine Square, the big square in the middle of Gaza City. And the image that I saw was the Shabab, the young men climbing onto Israeli armoured cars with olive branches. Because that was such an image of hope. They literally thought their lives were going to change, there was going to be peace, they would become like ordinary citizens with a future. And 32 years on, yes, their life changed. But even before the 7th of October, when I started going back in 2016, I could see that it changed for the worse. Much worse conditions than when we had lived here. And that's because we let them down. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. That was a big loss to any potential peace process. But both Europe, the UK and the US, we just kind of lost interest. We didn't fund it, we didn't guide it, we didn't lead it, we didn't take up that opportunity to build peace between Israel and Palestine as part of the Oslo Accords. So it is all on us and on every single government that failed to commit to that peace process. And that's why we are where we are. And as I said, I only hope that the international community can learn that we can't just let, oh good, Gaza's gone off the agenda. We just let it rumble on like a running sore, because that doesn't give peace in Israel or Palestine, but it also doesn't give peace or stability in the rest of the Middle East while this running sore continues.
Yes, thank you.
Just a slightly different tack. I mean, the problem is Israel and Zionism. That's the problem now. But I just wonder, in regard to Hamas, you raised Hamas there. Islamic fundamentalists are not renowned for their support for women's rights. Did you have any problem treating women in the hospitals from Hamas? Is it a problem?
No, not at all. When you were in Gaza, obviously there was 2 parts to Hamas. There's the Al-Qassam brigades and obviously Islamic Jihad, the kind of fighters, an extremely violent group. But obviously one of the opportunities that was missed was Hamas were elected in 2006 and suddenly had to become the government. You know, there's a big dollop of pragmatism that has to arrive if you become the government rather than protesters or opposition. And so there could have been an opportunity even at that time to drag them into the modern world, which wasn't taken. But no, I mean, this is not like Saudi Arabia. Women drive, we had women surgeons beginning to be trained. We had women doctors, we had male nurses. You know, there was none of that either in our original time in Gaza or under the Ministry of Health, under Hamas. So no, I never had any issue with that. The Palestinians used to be the most educated population, because as they lost land, wealthier families used to send particularly their sons, but also daughters, to Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, to be educated. So lots of doctors, engineers, and it was very much an investment in education and modernism because they lost land to pass on. And so when we worked there, part of the 1987 Intifada was a sort of return to basics. You know, we're not getting anywhere, so we should return to our Islamic roots, and people began to dress in traditional clothes. Although very much women tended to wear a hijab, not a burqa, and not a niqab. I mean, there would be a few, but mostly it was just a hijab, a headscarf. But people would have wedding photographs from the 70s and early 80s in, you know, sleeveless dresses, and here we were on holiday somewhere. You know, they were actually very modern people. They're not actually an Arabic people. It's thought they may have originated from the Philistines, who were a Mediterranean Sea people, but we don't have records of that. Going there as an Irish woman, I totally identified with them, because their culture is number 1, family, number 2, hospitality, number 3, music. And that welcome and the way people made you feel when you were engaging with them, frankly, was wonderful. And like many patriarchies, when I was engaging with women's groups, even back in 91 and 92, once the men weren't in the room, you realise it's like that line from Big Fat Greek Wedding, when she says, he may be the head of the family, but I'm the neck, and I can turn him any way I like. The strength, it's the strength of Palestinian women in society that holds the society together. And once you started to have friends and know people, you realise that. But no, even going back since 2016 under the Hamas government in Gaza, there wasn't any issue with women being out and about, or in us treating women, or in training and teaching women doctors and nurses.
Just entirely on a personal level, what would be your own hopes to be able to return, and would you be meaning to go and work there again?
First of all, I need to get my legs working. As you see, I came in here in crutches. But yes, I would happily go back. Obviously, I've been an MP for 9 years, so it's not as if I'm, you know, doing breast surgery at the moment. But after Gaza, I spent a short period in Lebanon for MAP after the Lebanese war, working in Tyre and Sidon and looking at how to... Initially I was saying, how do we get the surgical units going again? And then I very quickly realised the whole hospitals weren't functioning, because they had simply been almost like first aid posts during the war. And so I had done a report for MAP then. So if MAP thought that I could be of use, or if any other organisation thought I could contribute, whether in a clinical way, so clinical examination and diagnosis, I wouldn't operate, it's too long since I've done that, then I would happily go back. And, you know, I've been saying to people, you know, as I said at the beginning, former MP and consultant breast surgeon, I'm now a former everything. And one of my friends said, well, you're lucky when you're putting former MP that it doesn't say disgraced. Because usually those are the words that go together, is disgraced former MP. So I'm probably not somebody who's going to sit in their garden for the next 20 years. I am retiring. I will spend time with Hans, who's been retired for 6 years and who's just been working for nothing as my researcher, chauffeur and everything else. But yes, I wondered, what might I get involved in? There's things I would love to be involved with in Scotland if it contributed to the future of our NHS or the development of the wellbeing economy. But I think probably what the first project I might get involved in has presented itself, which is the support for the Scottish Palestinian Health Partnership, organising it from here. And if it was felt I could contribute, I would have no qualms about going back to Gaza.
I'd just like to thank you so much for coming, you and Hans. I've retired and I'm sort of not retired, but you'll never retire, I get that impression. And we're so grateful for that, because I think think we'd probably like to have you back again. We'll have to see how things are going, especially with the new partnership. That'd be fantastic. It's given us a lot to think about and a lot to pray about, and as you say, prayer does make a difference, and so does the work that we do as well. And every single conversation can make a difference. So you've given us a lot of encouragement as well, despite the fact that it's horrific. So thank you so much for that inspirational session. Thank you.